Hello again. Spider-Man Miles Morales is a game where your best friend is a terrorist, your uncle protects you by breaking your ribcage, and your mentor leaves you unprepared so he can be with his girlfriend in Europe. With all that said, it should be pretty obvious why this game didn't stick the landing. I adore the first Spider-Man game, but that doesn't mean I think it's perfect. But still, I 100% it a week after launch, so I do have some sort of connection to it. Sadly though, let's just say I lost the original save files for the game, because my original PS4 bricked. So yeah, I liked this game a lot, and in particular, there were 4 different pillars of gameplay that I think were done specifically well. None of them specifically were incredible, but just all of them together formed a game that was exactly what I wanted out of a Spider-Man game. These pillars are story, exploration, combat, and stealth. So for the rest of the review, I'm basically going to be reviewing Miles Morales under these 4 pillars, and basically saying what it does better, what it does worse, and everything compared to the first game. Obviously, with this game being a follow-up, they have to show how it connects to the first game. The events of the first game don't really matter too much though, other than the fact that Miles' dad is dead. There's a huge fight between Spider-Man and all of his greatest enemies. Oh yeah, and Peter's sort of like Miles' mentor now. And sure, I guess I'll just mention right now, this game just looks absolutely beautiful, especially on my PlayStation 5. The game does open very well. They have you learning the combat by fighting some escaped prisoners, as in the background Peter Parker's Spider-Man is fighting Rhino. Here there's a very cool set piece of you running through the mall on his back, and honestly it's one of the most notable set pieces in the game. Details like how the mall is all dressed up for Christmas makes me really happy, and definitely sets up a very lighthearted tone for the rest of the game. Then there's a very fun Rhino boss fight. But more importantly, we're introduced to one of the key antagonists. Simon Krieger is very forgettable. He's your average white, rich, morally incorrect douchebags. He stole credit for a new energy-saving technology, not to mention that this technology itself is very dangerous, and this comes into play later in the story. Oh, and because Peter Parker is going on a trip, he won't be able to help Miles. He only has small cameos for the rest of the game. Anyways, while investigating a Simon Krieger research facility, he gets interrupted by a new terrorist group, but I'll talk about them more later. The game then slows down so that you can learn more about the story and the characters. This at home section is incredible in the sense that it shows off the characters and also the amazing graphics. Of course here you have Miles' lovely mom, and your close friend Genki that helps you out with being Spider-Man. The section has so many details and secrets, and most importantly your childhood friend Finn comes over to join you with dinner. Although things are a little awkward, it's obvious that you're very close. Despite the game being downhill from here, this is still a very good segment. You see, right after this, you have a mission with your uncle in which he basically immediately finds out that you're Miles, and even though I enjoy how short this game is, it still feels very rushed. Talking about rushed, you then get some exposition on Finn's brother who died. Anyways, now there's another set piece that develops the terrorist that I mentioned earlier. And they very obviously hint towards the main terrorist being a girl. And you're almost definitely thinking exactly what I was thinking. There's no way that this terrorist is not Finn. Oh, and look at this. I guess we were right. This is honestly one of the worst reveals I've ever seen in a video game. I do not care about who this character is because they didn't set them up enough, and also the reveal is very anticlimactic. Within the first minute that you meet the character, you learn that it's Finn. I guess I'll talk about this more later, but Finn is like my least favorite character in the game as well, so it just absolutely sucks. Oh yeah, not to mention now, Spider-Man can go invisible, which is one of the reasons why I hate the stealth mechanics in this game as well, so 2 bad things within one segment. Now that Miles knows that Finn is the leader of the terrorist organization, he can use that to be able to sneak in and learn more about them. It's not that hard though, as Finn basically spells out exactly what her motives are.
My brother created new form. Roxxon killed him. I won't stop until Roxxon's gone.
The fact that her entire character can be described by these 3 sentences just explains why I hate it so much. Quite honestly, it's even more than that. You see, many other characters out of these simple storylines are perfectly fine. The only reason why this one falls flat is because it just stays like this the entire 8-hour game. So let's take a look at some other games that have similar storylines but are able to flesh them out much better, for instance Ghost of Tsushima. I finished this game recently, and a prominent storyline throughout almost all the side missions is revenge. Revenge for family members, revenge for grief. Yet, unlike Finn, in getting revenge, they aren't treated like the enemy, they're treated still like a friend that you can help, and they end up actually going through some story arcs because of that. They end up actually changing themselves, instead of spending the entire game as a one-sided character. Much of the main storyline also deals with these tones of revenge and friendship. Yet again, unlike Spider-Man, they're able to make you understand why your friend would do something so bad. They're able to really make you feel like they're doing this not necessarily out of spite or revenge, but out of genuine survival. They need to do these bad things because if they don't, they believe they will actually die. This is a good way to push a friendship narrative where you don't want to see the other person go down, but at the end of the day, you still have to stop them for doing bad things. I hate relating and comparing completely separate games from each other, but this is the only way that I can really describe why Spider-Man Miles Morales' story fell so flat to me. Although the tones should obviously be different, as Spider-Man should have a much more lighthearted tone because, you know, it's a superhero game, at the end of the day, they just completely failed at making you care for the characters and understand their motivation. Like, I mean, yeah, I know why Finn wants to get revenge, but in the way they do it, they don't make it feel complex, they don't make her feel sympathetic. She just feels one note and basic. Anyways, I also think it's important to note that your uncle's helping out with your investigation, and this sort of builds up to a climax later because your uncle just really doesn't want you to get hurt. Anyways, now as Spider-Man, you have a nice little fight with Finn, which sort of leads to you having to admit that you're Miles. Wow, these characters are feeling some really serious emotions right up, and up they make up like within the next 30 minutes. Anyways, because the game is too scared to make some real conflict, they bring back the Rhino in his sort of Roxxon form. The Rhino then captures Spider-Man and Finn and takes them to the Roxxon facility, where they meet Simon Krieger. They mention again how Simon Krieger stole Finn's brother's idea for new form, but honestly, it's not really that important for the rest of the game. Here we then learn another one of Spider-Man's new abilities, and it sort of plays into why they can't take his mask off. It's like a weird electrical thing that sort of gets ignited here.
Oh man, that's hot.
As you and Finn escape, you have to fight the Rhino one last time with all of his Roxxon abilities. But the most interesting part is that you sort of find out the final plan for Simon Krieger. You see, Krieger knows that new form is very dangerous, and so he decides to overload the system so that it blows up much easier. Then he can blame the explosion on the terrorists and cause a lot of sympathy for his company. Even though I don't love Krieger as a villain, he definitely has motives, and it works out pretty decently. Finn isn't that coherent though, as you'll see in a moment. So Rhino insults her brother, and that causes her to get really mad and stab him. It's not confirmed if he dies or lives, but it's assumed that he's dead. Miles tries to stop her, but of course he doesn't really make it in time. She then gets very emotional and starts to beat up Miles. Quite honestly, this is the point in which I stopped caring for her character almost completely. This might not be the most popular opinion, but I really don't like her character. It's really whiny, and there's so many signs that she's just, you know, like a fucking terrible person, but she just doesn't really care at all. In a bit towards the very end, I'll show you how they try to make her even a little more redeemable, but it just doesn't work for me at all. Now we're getting to the final moments before the last few missions, and you have a nice little conversation with your mom. She finds out that you're Spider-Man, and it's a pretty nice moment. It really gets you ready for the end of the game. It's sort of similar to some of the ending parts of the last game, so at least this part's decent. Then all of a sudden you're captured by your uncle as you're traveling through the open world. This moment has been building up throughout the game because your uncle really just wants to protect you, yet he decides the best way to stop you from fighting Finn is fighting you himself. This is literally the biggest plot hole in the entire game. It would make sense if he's trying to pacify you or if he decides to help you fight Finn, but no, he decides to try to fucking kill you. Like, this is literally one of the hardest and most violent boss fights in the entire game. Anyways, after finally stopping your loving uncle that's trying to kill you, you're off to the final mission. There's a nice slow story section where they try to build Miles and Finn's relationship, except for the fact that this is at the very end of the game. There's some nice stuff to interact with, and a cameo from Spider-Man and Doc Ock. You try to warn Finn, but she makes off with a new form. At this point, there's also tons of riots and violence in the streets. Oh, and here you can see the point in which I completely stopped caring for Finn's character.
No! The reactor! Krieger changed the specs. You're not just gonna destroy Roxxon Plaza. You're gonna vaporize all of Harlem.
I'm not gonna let you lie to me again!
I'll talk about boss fights later, but basically Miles and Finn just argue the entire time. Being Spider-Man, of course you win, and then Finn has to see the consequences of her actions. They try to give her this oh shit moment, but it doesn't work at all. You're supposed to be sympathetic to her character, but at this point I just wanted to yell told you so. They try to make it seem like she's doing the wrong things for the right reason, but truthfully she's doing the wrong things for the wrong reason, and she's just really rude. Miles, being the good boy he is, tries to stop the reactor. Yet his new electric abilities can't handle it. Oh, and look, Finn's gonna redeem herself. Sort of. Spoiler warning, but Finn basically just fucking kills herself. She kills herself to save the city, but in my opinion, it's not really that redeemable. As I've described throughout this entire review, she's just not a well-written character. And oh boy, Miles survives. Stay strong, buddy. Now here's one of my favorite moments in the game. All of Miles' friends that he met throughout the game decide to protect his identity, and it's really sweet. Oh boy, cookie cutter ending alert. I mean, coming from a Spider-Man game, I don't really care, but nonetheless, Simon Krieger goes to jail. Miles' uncle does what's right by turning himself in, and Miles lives happily ever after. Oh, and not to mention Spider-Man comes back and they sort of set up another game. Honestly, if I had to gather up my opinions on the story specifically, it wouldn't be necessarily too negative. The problems for me lie with Finn and Miles' uncle, but I think I've already accurately displayed why I dislike them. But what the story does good is just continuing what the last game laid out for it, setting up more interesting gangs, literally reusing a villain from the last game. Interesting characters that just go through what we didn't see in the last game because Peter Parker was already an adult. If you're into the game for the story, I'm sorry, it's nothing special, but at least I can say it's mostly coherent and works well with the game that it's for.
Spider-Man does whatever a spider can. Spins a web any size, catches thieves just like flies. Look out, here comes the Spider-Man. Is he strong? Listen, buddy, he's got radioactive blood. Can he swing from a thread? Take a look overhead. Hey there goes the Spider-Man. In the chill of night, at the scene of a crime, like a streak of light, he arrives just in time. Spider-Man, Spider-Man does whatever a spider can. Spins a web any size, catches thieves just like flies. Look out, here comes the Spider-Man.
So yeah, if you've seen any of my videos before, you know that the only way I can sometimes accurately describe why I like a game so much is to show a montage or something. Now a lot of the background footage is showing things like collectibles and little secrets that you can do along the map. The map is filled with all these small little things to do, and honestly it's pretty good, but quite honestly, compared to the first game that I 100%, I got pretty bored of these fast. But nonetheless, I think the web swinging is still just a huge standout for this game. Much of the big levels and big set pieces are set in the open world, and because of that, it doesn't feel like you're put into a separate area for these main missions, but they're genuinely a part of the open world. They're just right there, and especially for such a big game in which you're swinging from tower to tower, it's really incredible that they just have these big missions in the middle of the huge open world. Because this game is much smaller than the first game though, the web swinging ability tree is actually much smaller, which in my opinion is a huge highlight because it allows anybody that played the first game to just get right back into it. You don't really have to do anything like you did in the first game, just boom, you're swinging, and it's as good as you last remembered it. This is the part of the game that makes you feel the most like Spider-Man. Web slinging is just so much fun. There's always stuff going on in the open world, whether it's a collectible that you need to find, or just a random event like a crime that's going on. It's a great way to put some things in between the main missions and side missions, and it allows these intermission-like parts to really shine. If I ever was to revisit one of these games, it would be just to swing around and have fun. But nonetheless, I think it's time to get to the actual meat and bones of the game, the stealth and combat. The stealth throughout this game is both very tight and fun like the first, but is ruined by a few things that they change. Honestly, it feels like so many aspects of this game are just ruined by some of the things that they've changed from the original. But I decided one of the best ways to actually critique the stealth in this game is by having a long clip in the background. Unlike other aspects of the game, the stealth is very much so at the player's own pace. And because of this, you can be very, very careful, but unlike the first game, they don't really reward you for this careful playstyle. I'll talk about that later, but first of all, as you can see here, it's just normal stealth action, like in the original. Getting rid of goons one by one, avoiding large groups until the end, it's all a lot of fun. But one of the biggest things they took away from the first game were some of the really cool web abilities. For instance, the trip mine was just so much fun. I loved that in the first game. It rewarded you for memorizing the enemy's sort of walking patterns, knowing where they're going to be next, and really catering towards a more careful playstyle. And even though the abilities in this game aren't terrible, they are definitely more combat oriented, or are just genuinely not as useful as the first game's abilities. Because why not, I decided to boot up the first game just for shits and giggles. And honestly, I had a great time redoing the stealth here. Don't get me wrong, these two games' stealth are very, very similar, but still there's a certain level of carefulness that's in this game that isn't in Miles Morales. As you can see here, I was genuinely really using these abilities, and it was just a ton of fun because honestly, you really had to use them wisely or else, you'd get caught and the entirety of stealth would be over. You'd have to go right into combat unless you'd web swing around to slowly get back into stealth, but that was pretty difficult. At the end of the day, the very powerful abilities was a great trade-off to losing everything once you're caught. Now, a lot of that praise goes to this game as well, but as you're about to see in the following clip, they really ruined it with one mechanic. So boom, here I'm in combat, I'm in trouble, oh no. And then all of a sudden, all I have to do is swing away, press a simple button, and then boom, I'm back to being in stealth. The idea of invisibility from a story perspective is really cool, but from a gameplay perspective, not so much. Yeah, there is sort of a little trick where you have to know when to use it and whatnot, but it still is just a complete get-out-of-jail-free card. For a game that relies on stealth so much, they really cucked themselves by making this mechanic so easily exploitable. Some may argue that at higher levels it's really useful and really necessary, but to that I say, well then just go on a lower difficulty. I beat this game on the hardest difficulty available on the first playthrough. In these stealth sections I almost never lost, because it's really hard to when you have, again, a get-out-of-jail-free card. Anyways, that's like the biggest gripe I have with the stealth. Like, it's not terrible, but again, it's just sort of broken in a way. But now let's get on to the only part of the game that I think is genuinely advanced since the last title, the combat. Unlike other parts of the game, the combat is very facilitated by the skill tree, so I guess I'll talk about that right now. Most of the skills are pretty basic and honestly don't really matter too much. And then there's also this sort of skin system. I unlocked every single skin in the first Spider-Man game, but I didn't really feel the need to do that here, mostly because it was a much shorter experience. Of course, with the skins come special abilities, and again, those were pretty cool and useful, but you know, not really that big of a deal. I mentioned this before, but here are all the side web abilities that are in the first Spider-Man game. Compared to the 4 that we have in this game, you know, they just downgraded a lot. I mean, of course, again, it's a smaller experience, but still, it feels like so much was taken out from this side. Anyways, the combat itself is a lot of fun, so I guess I'll talk about the changes they made and how much fun it is. I mentioned this earlier, but I beat the game on the hardest difficulty, and honestly, it wasn't that bad at all. I mean, here's the thing, I'm not that good at video games, but nonetheless, I had a pretty easy time going through this game. But the combat is basically the exact same as the first game, so I guess a lot of it is that I was very accustomed to the old combat, so I was able to go into this one very well. They try to add new enemy types, but it doesn't really feel new. Honestly, all the new enemy types are really just reskins of old ones. The only sort of new one is the gang that Finn's in, and these guys alone, again, aren't really that much of a challenge. I mean, the factions in the first game were a lot of fun, and I actually remember those very fondly. Especially like the masked Yakuza guys or whatever, like those guys are really cool. And really the only character that the different factions in this game have is, oh, this one's red, oh, this one's purple. But at least it gives some nice enemies for Spider-Man to fight. The combat you see though on screen right now is basically all that you're getting, but there are a few slight additions from the first game that I guess I'll talk about now. So the combat is very similar, but as you can see in the top left of the screen, there's this weird orange bar that's there now. There's this sort of special meter that was in the old game, but now it can be used to do a lot different type of moves. For instance, here, look at this, it's a weird electric punch thingy. It's a lot of fun and it does diversify the combat, because quite honestly, in the old game you're just doing thing after thing after thing, and there wasn't really that much to do other than the occasional special. But then again, look, you can press circle and triangle and then do this really cool finisher animation. It's really interesting and honestly pretty diverse. I do think that the combat is a lot more fun in this game, just for these slight reasons. I didn't really use web abilities that much inside of the combat system in the first game, so not really using them that much here didn't really make that big of a difference for me. Just overall, it was a lot of fun to just use the different abilities and have fun. The combat is very fast-paced and flashy. You're so mobile and you have so many special moves now that are available to you. It's just a huge sandbox. Like, I'm not that big of a fan of brawlers like this, but it's just so much fun. Similar to the exploration, this is one of the only parts of the game that really exemplifies the fact that you're Spider-Man. It's so good. Anyways, let's move on to boss fights. All of the boss fights are very, very challenging, honestly, especially on the difficulty mode that I chose. The Rhino boss fight is really interesting, and all these bosses almost feel like puzzles. There's always usually a special thing that you can do, and I don't know, it's interesting. I've mentioned how much I hate the fight with your uncle in terms of story, but in terms of gameplay, it's a lot of fun. Honestly, this is probably the boss fight I died the most on. It was really challenging, but again, I pushed through. I honestly never really feel that encouraged to continue with boss fights if I'm not doing good, so the fact that I didn't turn down the difficulty level, even though I was doing really bad, proves that combat is a lot of fun in this aspect. Honestly, the main reason why I probably find these boss fights to be so interesting, even though, you know, reasonably they really aren't, is because all the other enemies aren't that interesting. They don't have these special moves, but the bosses do, so that makes them much more interesting in terms of combat compared to the regular parts of the game. Yay, the Finn boss fight. It's a lot of fun other than the fact that I just get annoyed at her so much while she tries to, you know, spout her bullshit to you. But I guess the combat arena is really cool, you know, it gets more destroyed as the fight goes on. but other than that, it's pretty cookie cutter. So yeah, just overall, I fucking love the combat in this game. I can't put it any other way other than it's a lot of fun. It's flashy, it's really fast, it's quick. There's so many different things that you have to be keeping track of. You have to have really fast reaction time for dodging things with your spider sense ability. It's so much fun. Just like Doom Eternal, you're like an acrobat dancing along the arena. Specific enemies need to be taken down in specific ways, and you're just constantly challenged by new variety. And again, this game is really short, so I doubt that you're gonna get really sick of the combat within, I don't know, 9 hours that it takes to beat the game. I can't wait to see how they expand upon this in the next game, yet hopefully the turnaround time for that won't be too long. Now that I'm done with the combat section, I just want to add on a few quick things that have been on my mind before we do the conclusion. So first of all, there are a few puzzles throughout this game. They're all environmental based though, so it's not really that boring. Oh, and they did get rid of a lot of things in the first game I think people didn't like. For instance, those like BioShock weird tube games, I don't know. I actually enjoyed those a lot, but I guess a lot of people didn't. Also, even though I did very heavy critiques of the story, that's just what I like to do. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a superhero game. It's not supposed to be like the next God of War. And it's not trying to be, so if you're not, expecting something crazy, then you're gonna have a fine time. In fact, I enjoyed my playthrough. It's just looking back, it was so unmemorable and just so terrible in specific aspects that I just really had to critique it. And then also on the subject of voice acting, I think a lot of people sort of gave Miles Morales' voice actor a bit of hate. Looking back on the footage, I don't hate it as much looking back actually, but I definitely think he sounds maybe too much like a little squeaking kid. And it's probably the fault of the people that wrote the script, but Miles Morales and also Finn are just so whiny and annoying the entire game. And yeah, it's for both of them. Even though I exemplified Finn earlier, Miles Morales is just as whiny throughout the game. It's just like the entire game, they're just doing this, and it gets old very fast. I mean, I think some people are trying to compare him to like the movie Miles Morales, but I actually don't really think that those comparisons are that good. Like, I think this is its own thing, and although I do remember not liking it that much while playing through, it wasn't that bad. But just the overall voice acting and acting throughout the game isn't really that good. I mean, as I said, you shouldn't be expecting some sort of, epic Red Dead Redemption 2 type acting, but it's passable. Something I'm completely shocked that I haven't even mentioned yet has been the amazing load times. I mean, here's just some unedited footage of me starting up the game. It's like, you're instantly in the action. It's fucking amazing. Also, I'll mention the adaptive triggers and the amazing haptic feedback of the DualSense controller. I mean, I don't really want to talk about it too much, because I feel like it's just something that you have to get your hands on to really experience. But at the end of the day, there's just so many advancements due to the PS5 that made this game so much more enjoyable than any other video game I've played in terms of UI and general user experience. Anyways, now I guess it's time for the conclusion. And all similar to all the other games I've reviewed, it's not really one single thing that makes a game great or a single thing that makes it bad. It's just the culmination of all the things the game does that says whether I like it or not. I'd say half of the things the game does, it does expand upon the last game, or at least keep just as good. But then the other half, they either sort of butcher or ruin. And in fact, I guess if you keep in mind the first game, I'd probably rate this game 7.5 or a 7, because it just does what the first game does, but a little worse. I think if you're planning to just have a fun time, I mean, this game is really short, so it'll be a great experience if you just want to pick it up and have fun for a bit. But is this a defining PS5 title? Not really. I can't wait for God of War, and Horizon Forbidden West has been doing really good. So honestly, if you're looking to pick up that amazing PS5 exclusive that gives an entire purpose to buy the console, honestly I'd say hold back. And now I just sort of want to talk some things about this channel, and a special side project you can visit right now that has tons of written reviews and articles. Just go to your browser and search in DashMan.games, or just go to the link in the description. There's already a ton of articles on there, and I'm honestly really proud of my work. It's a lot of fun to just make things, and especially I can actually make these things at school or wherever I am. It's a lot less cumbersome than making an entire video, so I'll have a lot of things out there almost weekly. So far I've been able to publish an article at least every week, if not 2 a week. There's also a few other things that you can check out on there. For instance, there's a link to my YouTube channel again, and in fact I'll actually make some follow-ups to some videos. There's also probably one of my favorite websites, howlongtobeat.com, and here you can check out my playing list, my backlog, my completed games, the games I've retired. It's just so much fun. Most importantly, there's actually a score on all the games that I've completed, so you can actually see what my opinions are on any game that I've beaten. Honestly, if you guys want me to, I could even stream on Twitch sometime. So thank you guys so much for watching. It's been over a year since my last upload. I can't promise that I'll have other videos out really soon, but I do have some other videos that I do have planned. I mean, here's the thing. This video wasn't a passion project. I don't absolutely love this game, so I wasn't really motivated. I mean, this video has been in works. I have all the gameplay was recorded last December. Like, literally an entire year ago, this gameplay was recorded. Over a year ago. And then I started editing, like, 6-8 months ago, and I just took long breaks. I have nobody to blame but myself, honestly. Just not motivation, because I don't really care about this game. And the next videos are probably going to be a lot shorter, maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes, but sometimes I just can't stop myself. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm very happy to have this thing out and finished, off my back. I can say I did it. And I'll see you guys in the future. Bye. Ring, ring, ring. Ring, ring, ring. Ring, ring, ring. Telephone.